The sun was just beginning to dip below the jagged edge of the western horizon, casting streaks of gold and blood red across the sky. Heat still clung to the rocks, shimmering in waves as the desert exhaled the breath it had held all day. A dry wind stirred the sagebrush, whispering old secrets that only the land remembered. Dust kicked up under the hooves of a tired horse, its muscles straining beneath a worn saddle. Every step echoed with the weight of the miles behind them. The horse, an aging blue roan mustang named Blue, carried a man who sat tall but weary in the saddle. Wade McAllister, 35 years of hard miles behind him, was a man carved from grit and loss. His hat was low, shadowing a face that had seen more than its share of bad luck, bar fights, and bullet holes. A silver star, dulled with age, was tucked in his coat pocket, not worn on his chest anymore. That life was behind him now. All he wanted was peace. But the Wild West rarely gives a man peace. Not for long. Wade had been riding with Blue for over 7 years. That horse wasn't just an animal. He was family. Saved Wade's life more than once. Pulled him out of a gunfight in Tombstone when the bullets flew too thick. Hauled him through a flash flood in the Rio Pecos when the river rose fast and hungry. And last winter, when snow piled to the eaves and wolves circled their campfire, Blue had stood guard, refusing to sleep. Wade didn't talk much to other folks, but he talked to Blue. Just a few more miles. "Partner," he muttered that evening, patting the horse's neck. "We'll camp near the old cottonwood. Water and soft ground. You'll like it." Blue flicked his ears, as if he understood. They were rounding a bend near a dry creek bed, just a patch of sand and dead mesquite, when fate struck, a sudden snap of movement, so quick it could have been wind. But it wasn't. From beneath a sun-bleached branch, a rattlesnake lunged. Thick and mean, it hit like a coiled spring, striking deep into Blue's front leg. The horse screamed, a sound no man should ever have to hear. It wasn't pain alone. It was fear, a cry from the gut of a creature who didn't understand why death had just come for him. Blue reared, staggering sideways. His leg gave out. Wade was off the saddle in a blink, boots skidding in the sand as he rushed to his partner's side. "No, Blue!" The cowboy dropped to his knees beside the horse. His hands fumbled for his belt knife, for a rag, for his canteen, anything. But nothing made sense. The world spun. His heartbeat was in his throat. He could see the twin puncture marks already turning dark, swelling up fast. Veins pulsed purple under Blue's hide. The horse's breath came short and rapid, and foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Wade pressed his hands against the leg, tried to keep the blood from running too fast. He'd seen snake bites before, but never this bad. Not on something he loved. "Not like this," he whispered, eyes burning. "Not you, boy." He had buried friends, buried a brother, lost a woman he loved to fever. But this, losing Blue, that would break something deeper. Tears spilled without warning. They hit the dry earth like drops of summer rain. Useless. Too late. The rattlesnake, satisfied with its work, slithered back into the brush. The only sound left was the distant wind and the rasp of Blue's labored breath. Wade gritted his teeth and laid his head against Blue's neck, feeling the warmth begin to fade. "Please," he said. "Stay with me. I'll fix this. I'll do something. Just don't leave me, not out here." But the desert offered no answers, only silence, and that silence was the loudest thing Wade had ever heard. The desert had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest like a stone. No birds, no breeze, just the ticking of time running out. Wade sat in the sand, cradling Blue's head in his lap. The horse was still breathing, but just barely. His coat was slick with sweat, his eyes wild with pain. Wade didn't know how much venom had gone in, but it was enough. Too much. His hands were covered in dust and blood. His mind kept racing through things he'd heard in old trail tales. Cut the wound, suck the venom, tourniquet the leg. But what if he did it wrong? What if trying to help killed Blue faster? He cursed himself under his breath for not paying attention, for not riding wide of the rocks, for letting his guard down. He buried his face in his arm and gritted his teeth. He hadn't cried like this since his mother died when he was 16. Not when he buried his pa. Not even when the woman he almost married rode off with a gambler from El Paso. This wasn't just grief. This was helplessness, and he hated it. Then a sound, soft, subtle, like wind through a shawl or a bird landing without flapping. Wade looked up, blinking through sweat and tears. She stood maybe 20 feet away, at the edge of the gulch. A tall figure, still as stone, half shadowed by the last light of day. Long black hair braided down her back, a faded red skirt that brushed the tops of her bare feet. She wore a beaded sash and carried a satchel that hung low on her hip. For a second, Wade thought maybe he was seeing a ghost. The desert plays tricks like that, especially when your heart's broken and the sun's gone. But she stepped closer. "Your horse is dying," she said plainly. Her voice was calm, like water running over stone. Not cruel, just true, Wade blinked. I know. She crouched down beside the horse and rested her hand on Blue's side, just above the swollen leg. Her fingers were weathered, stained with herbs and dust, but there was gentleness in her touch. "Bitten by a rattler. A big one," she said, too close to the heart. "If we don't work fast, he won't see the moon rise. Wait, who are you?" Wade asked. He was on edge, not sure what to think. "You from a ranch nearby?" She didn't answer the question. Instead, she opened her satchel and pulled out a handful of dried roots and leaves, a curved flint knife, and what looked like a thin bone tube. Tools Wade didn't recognize, but they had the air of something ancient, something passed down. "I'm Apache," she said simply. "My name is Taza. My mother taught me how to speak to poison. My grandmother taught her. This horse has a chance, if you do exactly what I say." Wade narrowed his eyes. "You can fix him?" "I can try. But not if you sit there crying like a child who lost his toy. The desert doesn't care about your tears." Her words stung, but they snapped him out of his grief. He looked down at Blue, who was now trembling from shock. Time was running out fast. "All right," he said, standing up stiffly. "Tell me what to do." Taza nodded once, sharp and sure. "Then get the firewood behind that mesquite." "I need heat. And clean water if you have it." Wade grabbed his canteen and moved fast, collecting what dry branches he could find. By the time he turned back, Taza had already laid out her tools in a precise pattern on a blanket of woven reed. She was grinding something with a stone, mixing herbs, her lips moving in quiet chant. "This is going to hurt him, isn't it?" Wade asked, glancing at the flint blade. "Yes," she said, "but not as much as dying." She poured water into a small clay bowl, crushed a red root into it, and began packing it into the swollen wound. Blue kicked weakly, groaning. Wade knelt and held the horse's head, whispering, "Easy, Blue. Easy now. You hold on. She's trying to help." Taza didn't stop moving. She worked like someone who'd done this 100 times. Hands steady, eyes focused, her presence cutting through the panic like a knife through rawhide. Finally, she looked at Wade. "Now," she said, "the hard part begins." The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows across the canyon walls. Night had settled over the desert like a heavy blanket, thick with silence. Only the sound of burning mesquite wood and the ragged breaths of the injured horse broke the stillness. Wade sat close to Blue, one hand on the horse's neck, the other clenched around his worn hat. His palms were slick with sweat despite the cooling air. Every few minutes he'd whisper something, anything, to keep Blue awake. "Hang in there, partner. We're not done yet." Across the fire, Taza moved with a quiet urgency. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing never changed. She'd gathered more herbs, some of which Wade had never seen in all his years riding through the frontier. Powdered cactus root, crushed yarrow, something she called snake flower, which she burned slowly in a clay bowl, letting the smoke swirl over Blue's wound like a healing fog. "What are you doing now?" Wade asked, his voice hoarse. "Drawing the poison down," she said, "and keeping his spirit from floating away. If he sleeps too deep, he won't come back." Wade glanced at Blue's leg. The swelling was ugly, black and red streaks creeping up past the shoulder. The bite side had been cut open, cleaned, and packed with her poultice, bound tight with strips of cloth soaked in something that smelled like cedar and smoke. "Is it working?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. I've seen horses die faster than this. That's the good news. But he's still walking a narrow trail. One wrong step, and he falls. Wade looked up at her. You ever done this before?
For a horse?
She met his eyes. Yes, for my father's war pony. And once for a white man's horse who didn't deserve saving, but the horse did. That answer said everything. Taza reached into her pouch again and pulled out a small bone pipe. Not for smoking. It was hollow, carved from the wing bone of a hawk. She stuck one end in her mouth and leaned over the wound. What the hell are you doing now? Wade asked, alarm rising in his throat. Drawing the last of the venom, she said calmly. Don't talk. Just hold him still. Wade gripped Blue's reins and pressed his forehead to the horse's. I got you, boy. You just stay with me. Taza sucked through the pipe, drawing out dark, watery blood, spitting it into the fire, which hissed with every drop. She repeated this again and again, until sweat beaded on her brow and her hands began to tremble. Finally, she pulled back and spat one last time into the flames. He fights hard, she whispered. Wade sat back, exhausted from just watching. So do you. Taza sat cross-legged and closed her eyes, placing both hands on the earth. She stayed like that for a long moment, then opened her eyes and spoke without looking at him. Now we wait. His body must decide whether it will accept the medicine or the poison. Wade nodded slowly, then leaned back against the saddlebag, eyes heavy with the weight of fear, hope, and everything in between. How'd you learn all this? He asked after a while. This medicine, these ways? She looked into the fire, from women who weren't afraid of pain, from the desert itself, and from watching death come too many times not to learn how to stop it. Wade studied her face. She looked young, but her eyes were old. Old in the way only people who've lost a lot can be. Why help me? He asked. You don't know me. I could be a scoundrel or worse, she turned to him. Because your tears were real. Most men would have shot the horse and walked away. But you cried like you lost your brother. That's not weakness. That's a man worth saving. Wade swallowed hard and looked at Blue. The horse stirred slightly, his breathing just a little steadier now. Taza saw it too. He's not safe yet, but he's not dying anymore. Not tonight, the wind shifted. The fire flared, and in the stillness between breaths, Wade felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Morning broke slow and quiet over the desert. The first rays of sun crept over the red rock cliffs, painting the canyon in soft gold. The fire had burned down to embers. A thin wisp of smoke drifted lazily into the pale sky. Wade McAllister hadn't slept. He'd stayed by Blue's side all night, speaking to him in hushed tones, rubbing his neck, watching every breath rise and fall. With every hour, the horse seemed a little stronger. His breathing had evened out. The swelling in his leg had stopped spreading. Wade reached out and laid a hand on Blue's shoulder. The skin was warm, not burning, not cold. His heart was still strong. He made it, Wade whispered. Behind him, the sound of footsteps on sand. He turned to see Taza, standing with her arms crossed, watching the sunrise. Her face was calm, though the lines around her eyes hinted at exhaustion. She hadn't slept either. I owe you everything, Wade said quietly. Taza didn't answer right away. She walked past him and knelt beside Blue, her fingers pressed gently around the wound. She opened the bandage, checked the color, the texture of the skin. Then she nodded once. He'll limp for a while, she said, but he'll walk and ride. Wade exhaled like a man finally allowed to breathe. I don't even know how to thank you, he said. What you did? I couldn't have done it. Not in 100 years. Taza looked at him. Then remember it, she said. That's thanks enough. He frowned. Remember what? She sat down beside the dying fire, picked up a stick, and stirred the ashes. Most men out here, she said, live hard. They shoot first. Cry later, if at all. They lose things and call it fate. But when your horse went down, you didn't just stand there like a coward. You dropped to your knees and cried for him. I saw that. Wade lowered his gaze, a little ashamed. Yeah, I cried like a damn fool. No, she said firmly.
You cried like a man who loves something more than himself.
That's rare in these parts. Wade was quiet for a long moment. I've lost a lot in my life, he finally said. But I've never begged anything to stay the way I begged Blue last night. Felt like my whole life was tied up in that one moment. If he died, I think part of me would have gone with him. Taza nodded slowly. That's what makes you different. Not the gun on your hip, not the scars. It's that you have room in your soul for something besides survival. He looked at her, really looked. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but there was age in her voice. Life had taught her things Wade had never learned in all his years riding from town to town. You said once your people know the way of snake poison, he said. But I think you know more than that. You understand hearts. People. She gave a half smile, the first he'd seen from her. When you live close to the land, she said, you learn to watch more than speak. The desert teaches you who's real and who's already dead inside. They sat in silence for a while, then Wade stood, stretched his stiff legs and looked down at his horse. Well, partner, he said softly, looks like you're gonna be all right. But next time we ride through snake country, you walk first, Blue snorted weakly. And Wade chuckled for the first time in days. Taza rose, brushing the dust from her skirt. I should go, she said. Wade turned. You sure? There's coffee in my saddlebag. And jerky if you like meat tougher than leather. She shook her head. My place is east, back in the hills. But your trail leads west. Wade hesitated, then reached into his coat. He pulled out something small, his old sheriff's badge, tarnished and dented. He held it out to her. You earned this more than I ever did. Taza looked at it, then at him. Keep it, she said. Not because you were a lawman, but because you remembered what it means to care. She turned and began to walk, her silhouette blending with the rising sun. Wade watched her go until she disappeared into the light. Then he turned back to Blue, who was already trying to stand. Easy there, Wade murmured, smiling. We've got a long road ahead, but I reckon we'll ride it together. And in that moment, with the sun on his face and the desert behind him, Wade McAllister felt something he hadn't in a long, long time. Whole.